Let's kick off with webinar 6, like I said. So where have we come to so far? Last week, we looked at initiating data governance and we focused on starting small. This week, we're moving on to how we can upscale from those small initiatives and how we can grow the data governance capability within our institutions. And I can't believe how quickly it's going, but we're already at number 6 of 10, so over the halfway mark. So we're going to kick off with this slide, and this is something that's very important to know, is no matter where you start. So I think if you remember last week, what we did was we talked about 3 potential ways to start small with data governance, and we talked about maybe looking at quick wins, so those things that don't need much selling, they are understood as being pivotal and important to institutional business, and creating case studies around those things. For example, student number planning, league table position, regulation and statutory returns, etc., etc. We talked about maybe having pilot projects that might be on a smaller scale just to start to understand what the data governance capability could be and what it could do. And then we talked about joining existing data heavy programs. And again, starting small through there and building up a capability through that lens. Now, any one of those routes, for those that haven't got a full commitment to rolling out an institutional level data governance capability, all of those routes are justified to start. But it's not a case that you need to just do one of those things and then move forward. When we start data governance, it can take a long time to gain momentum. So it might be the case that you kind of go back and forth across these 3 starting points. So you might do a couple of quick wins. You might then be invited into existing projects. It's not a case of one and done. But the key is to start to build momentum and start to practice what needs to happen in order to start to formulate and embed the operating model that we talked about, which is the box in the middle. So again, we introduced you to this last week, but what you would see, no matter which area that you would be starting in on the left, you would have to do and manage and meet the framework no matter where you start. Now, that looks a bit scary because there are lots of lines everywhere. But what is key is that no matter what data governance initiative you are delivering on or working on, everything goes into one repository in the middle, which is your operating model. So that holds all of your data accountability, all of your training, all of the boards that need to manage the decisions around prioritizing. It holds your partners, all of your data quality initiatives, reporting, the terminology that everybody needs to use to make sure we have consistency in our language around data. All of that stuff is one model in the middle. So it doesn't matter how scary the lines look. This is very much about an iterative approach. So the more that you do, whether they are project-specific initiatives or not, the more you do, you are using every experience as building blocks to keep building on that one resource. So it has to be very iterative. And it then happens naturally that you start to build for the future. So we do not want the case, it's not data governance if you start to create separate accountability lists, for example, for each project that you are a member of. Because that completely defeats the point of data governance. It's about creating consistency and minimizing the edge cases. So by no means does that mean that you would only have one accountable role for a set of data, but it's about minimizing those edge cases. So, for example, if you've got a quick win around student data for HESA reporting, for example, that then should follow through that accountability, that data quality checking, those reporting lines should follow through on any other areas that you touch in terms of student data. And it's by no means that means that the first answer is the right answer. It's about revisiting, reassessing, re-understanding what data is being used, why it's being used, how it's being applied, and where the best fit for accountability and quality monitoring, etc., sits. So very much an iterative approach. It's not a one and done. And you can do multiple things around the model. It's not a case that you need to do one project at a time. So this is where flexibility and agility really do come to the fore. Ultimately, where we want to get to is we want to be able to have a holistic institutional data governance initiative. Now, what the precursor for that is that we have defined data domains across an institution and subdomains, if that's applicable, but that we then have a high-level accountability framework and data quality framework over all of those domains. Now, no matter how small you start, you will naturally form a path to getting to that place. The speed at which you get to that place is very much dependent on how you want to scale. So whether you do a number of quick wins to gain momentum and gain sponsorship, or whether you do a mix of the three project types on the left, you will eventually start to put those puzzle pieces together to start to build and flesh out those data domains that exist in the university. Now, it's very much more piecemeal and can take longer to gain the momentum to do that, but ultimately you are on the right path. So it's not a case that there is a cookie cutter method of getting to that end goal of carving up all the institution's data into nice, neat domains and subdomains, having a list of people that are responsible for all of that data, knowing what the data quality markers are, knowing what all the terminology is, knowing how it fits into the boards and the administration of the institution. All of that will come. It just may mean that you need to think about how you scale up in order to get to that end goal. And as this series kind of has echoed a lot so far, it may not be that you have the capability to get there at the moment, specifically because of the environment that all institutions are working in at the moment. So it may be that for the shorter term, you want to focus on a mix of maybe the quick wins and joining in with existing projects. But ultimately, you shouldn't take your eye off the goal of making sure that there is one model, that model is consistent, and that every data governance initiative can feed into building that model on an iterative basis. Now, when we think about the framework itself, if we think about the image in the center on the previous page, there are some very high level objectives that data governance needs to be mindful of. So this is by no means the full suite of objectives, but there's 4 boxes there for the very high level version. So we're looking at being able to assess data quality, the key point around knowing who to go to. So who are the data experts, who are accountable for the data that we have specified. Contributing to the data strategy. So a lot of areas do kind of, they see data governance as an operationalizing the data strategy itself. And a lot of the operating model design comes out of data strategy work. But, you know, that may or may not be a foundational point within your institution. Where it's not, it's always about making sure that data governance operating model runs and is effective. And then the other component is very much about creating partnerships. So community of expertise around data. And that is not only with your accountable roles, that is also with critical partners around data protection, IT security, cyber security, project management, and sometimes even procurement, especially when we're looking at making sure data is governed with the potential procurement of new systems and things. Now, the reason I wanted to put this slide in is because you can see that it's the role of a data governance function is very much around people and relationships. It's about supporting, it's about collaboration, it's about speaking to different boards and things. It's about marketing what the offer is. So it's very heavily dependent on relationships. And that is the key theme that we need to take into any scaling activity we do around data governance. So there are 3 key questions that I always ask myself when we're looking at having established a small homestead in data governance. And it works well. We've brought people on board. We've started to show the value of what data governance can bring in particular projects or areas of data. we need to think about, okay, so how are we going to use this? So the three questions there at the top that you can see. One is, who have we worked with, or who do we know in our network that they themselves also hold a broad network? Is there somebody that we've worked with in the project that we can use as levers across into other areas where they know that some things aren't going quite well, and some of the initiatives that we've practiced with this particular project would be welcomed? Is it a case that actually we need to create a more marketed piece around how we can get in with certain individuals that have these extensive influences and relationships across the institution? Do we need to do something very specific to use this project that we've worked on as a case study and as an exemplar on how data governance can start to shift the way the institution works around its data? That's one question. The second question is about, how can we get our foot in the door? So I think I use this phrase quite a lot through these webinars, but it's always about being there off the hot foot to tell people how data governance can help them, how it will benefit them, and to make sure that data governance is not seen as an activity that is policing them or their activities around data. So again, the more that we can evidence the benefit and impact that we've had, no matter how small a scale, the more that can be packaged up into the right communications to get people to listen and to then start to think about, okay, how can I engage with this? How can this help me? And thirdly, as we know, the priority for institutions has really been bolted down given the challenging operating environment that we're in at the moment. So the key point here is make sure that we tap into a message or a priority of the institution that is key, that is at the forefront of thinking, that has been listed as a priority. And how is it that the data governance capability that we've evidenced so far through our small rolling out, how is it that we can use that as a case study to influence and to make people understand that actually applying this to some of the initiatives and objectives that the university is looking to achieve would be able to help them to achieve that better, and or give them insight into how those initiatives are being achieved. So, a key one there is, what are the confirmed and agreed key performance indicators? How many of those are based around data? How many of those then have you been able to work on smaller projects on elements of that data? And how can we package that up to say, actually, we've done this. This is what happened. This is what went right. This is what went wrong. This is what we've learned. This is how we can then apply this same learning to make sure that you have a much more broader understanding of how data is affecting those indicators. So those are the three key questions that I would ask myself. And the answers will be different for every institution. Every institution is different in terms of their priorities and their makeup, but also it depends very much on how you have rolled out the small scale implementation and what pick and mix model that you have used, what type of people you have connected with, etc., etc. So those three questions will help you to really narrow down where those potential opportunities are to help you scale. Now, like I said, a lot of this is predicated on having good relationships and working with the right people. It's not something that comes overnight. I would say 80% of the work that is taken in scaling and embedding data governance is purely down to having the right people on board, and creating those real established relationships with both experts in data itself, but also with roles of influence within the institution. And that's where, when it comes to people, it is critical to have a level of sponsorship and championship, not only at the most senior levels, but across the institution, so that people can kind of pass that message on and really vocalize the benefits. I spoke about making sure that people understand this isn't about policing data. This is about making sure that data is more effectively managed, and people feel like it's a benefit for them in helping them be more effective in their role around data. So relationship building is key. Messaging is key. How we market what data governance does is key. And those are small windows of opportunities through the relationships that we build that actually could be quite critical down the road. So although you may not see wins coming through the door immediately, there will definitely be something that comes through those relationships. You can also be a little bit more um, pre-planning around where those opportunities come from. So again, it comes back to networking, get into those project change meetings, understand what your institutional strategic aims are, get to the table around talking around KPIs, etc. Think about being non-technical and making sure that the messaging around business use of data is really heard loud and clear. And if you do that, there are usually a lot of opportunities in joining with project management offices, etc., etc. But the key there is where you are not evolving relationships and you're needing to get into the door with some of these groups of people that hold influence. It can be very much around, this is what I've done before, this is how it can help you. So that's where case studies and evidence speak 1,000 words. Now, again, all very iterative, can happen over a long period of time, but there are cases when the opposite can happen. It can happen very fast, where you just hit the right person at the right level that wants to take data governance and apply it in a lot of places. Now, it's good to scale, but you also need to be mindful that too much scale at too quick a speed is also a bad thing. You've got to think about the resource that you've got to do it, the skills that you need to be able to embed a fully functioning data governance function. You need to think about the language that you are using, and the more that you've got to juggle, the more diluted that language becomes, and therefore relationships and networks might be affected. And you also need to think about what avenues you're using to build data governance. You don't want to become too stretched and thin in terms of what you're trying to do and then not deliver anything. It's the classic over promise, under deliver type thing. So being focused on priorities and having a plan in mind of scale is really important. Otherwise, it's very easy to become very quickly overwhelmed. So those are the key takeaways in terms of potential opportunities for scaling. As we've had for the last 5 webinars, we have an activity for you guys to undertake. I will just stop sharing a second. I'll share the link in the chat and I'll talk you back through that activity. I'll just share that and reshare my screen. So what I have just popped in the chat is a link to a form. What we wanted to seek from you is your feeling on whether or not the approach that you would take to start small in data governance has changed from last week. So exactly the same question. Would you focus on quick wins, building a specific project, or bolt onto existing change projects? Now, there's an optional question there at the end that also asks you, has this scaling up session given you any idea about how much of that small scale you want to do? It eventually isn't small scale, but you can do a mix of these things on an ongoing basis for a certain amount of time to build that evidence before you then move into starting to put the jigsaw puzzle pieces together to create that overarching institutional data governance offer. So there's space there to put some contextual information, and also score then for each of those 3 areas that I've just spoken through about scaling. For the current state of your institution, there is a Likert scale for you to assess how much you agree with each statement around how much of a kind of an enabler each of those 3 elements would be in terms of scaling up data governance. Now, a big change from previous webinars, we have made your email provision optional now. For those people that want to continue to have the activities sent back to them, please continue to put your email address into the form, because we will do the same as what we've been speaking about, which is construct your personalized journey so that you have evidence to discuss further. For those that just want to take part in the vote but do not feel comfortable providing their email address, you are now able to take part in that vote. And again, that's really useful for us just to get a feel of what your opinion is in terms of how data governance can be initiated within your institution. So a very slight change there in terms of approach, but hopefully more people will be able to engage then with these activities. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the webinar. We are very slightly over. But we can see now that we are into the last few. So next week, we're going to be talking about pitfalls, common pitfalls, and how to avoid them. I'm sure there'll be lots in here that some people will be able to kind of speak of experiencing some of these things that we're going to come up with. We may try and get a speaker from the sector to add to the conversation, but we will try and organise that wherever we can. If we can't, then we've got a lot of experience to talk you through some of the common pitfalls that you might face. I hope that's been useful to you all. As always, thank you very much for engaging and coming along to these sessions. We very much hope you stick with us for the next 3 to take us up to the 10. But for now, hope you have a good week, and we'll hopefully see you again next week for pitfalls in data governance.